Hi, in this video I want to cover a few topics. I want to cover actually 4 topics in this video, and I want to cover them quickly as to not lose subject too quickly. But the subjects I want to cover are facing eternity, facing forever, knowing it once you die, you're going to be dead forever, or at least as far as we know, as far as the universe is concerned, our consciousness, our well-being. How far are we going to go? Obviously, it's an unanswerable question, and it's a question that's beyond our control. I mean, we can only do so much, except nothing. We can only come to terms with it because our psychology and the world are going to work in completely different ways, except for the fact that our psychology is part of the world and we have to live within the boundaries, and we're controlled by the boundaries of the world that we live in, the universe, the reality that we're living in. So there's only so much we can do when it comes to that kind of circumstance, is just live with this subject, the idea that we're going to possibly relive an existence either figuratively or literally reincarnating, not necessarily in the same world, but literally reincarnating if the world or the universe happens to collapse in on itself and cause us to have to relive our existences, our lives, or something along those lines. Or figuratively speaking, obviously, we're going to keep on continuing the game in this perpetuation of this cycle over and over again, this meat grinding cycle over and over again on the face of this planet, just to perpetuate an existence that's only fighting the losses that we have to constantly deal with on a daily basis. The next subject, if that wasn't long enough of an introduction for the first subject, is I want to use a couple of analogies like color to explain how there's only so much we can change in this reality, such as a color spectrum, how you don't have colors outside, so we're like explaining a color to a blind person. You can only explain the color if another person's seen it, or explain a taste or any kind of sense to someone that's already seen or heard or smelled or any touched, felt any kind of sensation. You can only explain it to someone else as. You can explain it, but they're not going to understand. That's the only sense they have, is understanding, but even then you can only understand so much. And the understanding is the only sense you have, but it takes those senses to understand to a certain degree something else, at least when it comes to the senses. It does take a certain degree of understanding and not only sensing to make sure at least that you maintain those senses, or maintain that the idea of what the senses are that you're feeling, to perpetuate that or continue that sensation. Thinking, I suppose, I would say, is one of the senses that you have to deal with, so that we have. Another thing with empty space, I want to discuss empty space and how the emptiness that you can, obviously, when it comes to how far we can go, how far we can travel, the boundaries, like I've mentioned before. I'm mixing all these ideas into one. The idea that we're constantly controlled by the boundaries surrounding us, and not only the boundaries like the walls in a room, but also the boundaries of your skin. Obviously you're not even touching yourself if you're touching yourself. The boundaries that exist between you and your own body exist on a almost thin air basis, because you're only touching, if anything, nothing when you touch yourself, because you're not even yourself. Your skin isn't even you to a certain degree, because you're touching thin air pretty much. Anyway, moving on. I'll get back to that idea and explain it more thoroughly. And how, the last subject I want to cover is pretty much how it's only bad that we're fighting, where there's only so much we can do. We're not doing anything, we're not achieving anything, we're only avoiding the bad. And that's really, we're avoiding bad and avoiding worse bad. We're getting bad to avoid worse bad, and there's nothing more to this game but to avoid bad and experience something that's objectively bad in another way, another sense. Or experiencing something by you lack something, and that may be something that's considered bad. You lack a chocolate bar you want to eat, but that doesn't mean it's bad. But it's bad in a certain degree, because all there is bad. That's the point that I want to get to, is that regardless, even if that's the case, even if it's not the same bad as something that's sort of like stubbing your toe is bad, compared to losing your pencil, and you want to find your pencil, not having a pencil, not having a candy bar. as opposed to getting your foot chopped off. Obviously, one's worse than the other, and we can understand that. We can weigh the value of one circumstance over the other, but it's also considering the fact that when it comes to anything that we're doing, it's about avoiding the bad and preventing the bad, and more than anything, preventing the bad and learning from your lesson. Like I've mentioned, lessons, you got to learn those in many ways, at least when it comes to a consciousness, preventing further bad in the future. But yes, it's about the fact that regardless, it's bad and avoiding more bad, and it's about choosing the less bad over the more bad or the more negative. And then it's about avoiding those things and doing and making a value judgment. I'm considering an equation where you have to consider what you should do and the which button you should press or which choice you should make, considering which option is going to cause the less amount of bad to happen, to happen in this reality. So it's just bad or more bad. You think you're in a good state, but it's because you're avoiding bad. You relieve the tension, and you're in a less bad state. And there's only, like I mentioned before, when you're in a less bad state, there's only more room for a worse state to exist once you're in a better state. So once you're in a better state, there's only the more room for your a negative state to take the positive state that you're in. So it's regardless of the state you're in, there's only bad to be gained. And when you have it bad, when things are really bad, there's less room for it, but you're there, and then sometimes, and then obviously you get rid of it, you're relieved. When you're relieved, it's all of it. When you relieve that, when you relieve it, it's there's only more room for the negativity to come right back and strike again. So there's only so much you can do to escape the negative, but sort of like I mentioned, sort of like anything that comes with logic, anything that comes with any kind of thing surrounding reality, like I mentioned, the bedrock of reality before. There's only so much you can change when it comes to that consideration, sort of like a color spectrum. Like I was mentioning before, you can only explain so much to a blind person, or you can only explain so much to a deaf person. They don't know what sounds like unless they heard sound before. Then all of a sudden, maybe sort of like getting lost in translation, speaking to someone, going around in circles, spreading the message, and somehow it gets lost in translation. Maybe all of a sudden they don't really remember what sound is like, sort of like our memory. Sometimes we use a point of reference that's slightly off just to remember, say, an image in our mind, and all of a sudden we lose that image, and all of a sudden it's slightly changed and altered every time until it's something almost completely different. The only thing left is the basic foundation of that image or that thought of the idea or the sound, and you don't really have the whole idea, and it's only a vague visage of, almost like putting an opaque piece of white paper over a drawing and only seeing a faint image or outline of it, of a very faint outline drawing, and you're going to try to draw over the lines, but you only get a faint image. You get the basic image, you get the basic idea, but you really lose a lot in translation. You get a lot less detail, and that less detail turns into detail in some other place. And our memory, our mind works in a similar way. So obviously that's an issue, but with our psychology, but obviously, yeah, that is a psychology thing. Regardless of that, yeah, so the basic idea is, yes, like going to the thing I wanted to mention about the color spectrum, is that, yes, we're living inside the boundaries of an existence, or like I mentioned, the bedrock before, and the foundation of our existence can only be changed so much. Sort of like color, sort of like anything, logic, anything is logically founded in this reality. There's only so much we can change. The colors exist. You can acknowledge them or not acknowledge them. They exist regardless of your acknowledgement. It doesn't matter what you think, because your thinking is a separate thing that's logically happening, but in a different place. It's something that's existing, but your logical incongruity with reality, the way you're perceiving reality, doesn't mean anything other than being an act of reality itself. Sort of like you listen, yeah, like, okay, first of all, I want to explain the analogy before I move on. But yeah, like colors, like digging so far down before you reach the other side of the earth, or whatever it may be. It's a logical straight line, or it's a logical line that leads from one place to another. It's only so much. It's regardless of how straight or unstraight the line is, it's something that leads to another place. Regardless of what you do, regardless of your mind, or the way you perceive things, or choose to perceive things, it doesn't matter, because it's a line that leads to some other place. It's one point A to point B. It doesn't matter what curves and circles Doesn't matter what you choose to believe or not believe. There's a truth there. There's a path that's being um, ventured, and regardless of how treacherous the path may be, it's something that exists regardless of your acknowledgement, because your acknowledgement means nothing in the face of reality. The truth, it doesn't care about your acknowledgement. You can not acknowledge all you want, but the truth is, it's not changing the fact that your foot just got cut off. You can just make it another fact that you're ignoring the fact that your foot got cut off. That's all you're doing, is ignoring the fact and creating another fact in its place. Not in its place, but another fact in reaction to that fact. And you just want to do that to avoid the pain. But that's an irrational response to pain. It's a rational response, but it's an irrational response to pain. And saying denial and saying, my foot didn't cut off, or not knowing. It doesn't matter if you know or don't know, if you're in denial or not in denial. It happened. So like whatever path you dig through the mud, the dirt, it doesn't matter. It's still a path that exists regardless. Sort of like almost analogizing your mind. It doesn't matter where you go. It's a logical path regardless. You can't avoid it. It's the facts of reality. And like I was mentioning before, the pain and doesn't matter. It is an irrational response. You're responding to the fact that you're in denial. So you're irrationally responding with denial to avoid facing something that you may not want to face. If that makes any sense. Back to my old ways. Anyway, but yeah, the color thing. Like I said, the color spectrum, sensing. Obviously, there's only so much color there. It doesn't matter what you want to do. You're still one of the foundations of the colors. There's no colors outside the spectrum that we're existing in. It's the same. There's no colors outside. Almost like a blind person not seeing colors. Not only can they not sense it, but they don't have any idea of what a color is. But it's still a color they're seeing. And regardless of the senses you have or not have, or your subjective opinion, there's still a fact there. There's still a foundation there. And the foundation doesn't matter what you want to believe or not want to believe. It's there regardless of whatever it may be. And there's no color outside the spectrum, because the spectrum colors all colors, from black to white, and everything in between. It doesn't matter what you want to believe or not want to believe. It's there, and regardless of what you believe or what you know, your ignorance means nothing. It's just turn the light on in the dark room of ignorance, and all of a sudden you see what is to see, sort of like a blind person. Turn on the light in the pitch dark room, and all of a sudden you'll see. It doesn't matter. It was there all along. You just didn't see it. Your senses mean nothing to the reality around you, except the fact that it was a different reality that was creating the darkness than you are in the reality you're living now, which is the light that just came on is letting you see the truth. And that's exactly what's happening. So that's one of those things that you can only do so much to avoid for so long. So it's something that exists regardless of what you want to believe or not. Let me repeat that one more time. Regardless of what you want to believe or not. So it's one of those things that's there. Or like I mentioned, denial doesn't matter. You can deny it all you want. It's right there in front of your face. So it doesn't matter if you're denying it or not. You go over and touch it, it's going to touch you back. It's going to have an equal and opposite reaction. You're going to touch it, it's going to respond. Think something's going to happen. You can say it didn't happen. Oops, my hand fell on the burner on the stove. Well, I can deny it all I want. I don't think you're going to deny it. But if you happen to react and not deny it later, it doesn't matter. It still happened. You still reacted. And your psychological response to not accept that reaction is just a psychological response. And it's just another fact that exists. You can deny all you want, but denying denial isn't really going to get you anywhere. So the best thing to do is just accept the reality, regardless, to a certain extent. Live in the truth as much as you can. Unless it's a little white lie here and there, if it's no harm done, right? But obviously it's best to live in reality as much as you can without using as little white lies as possible to yourself or to anyone else. So it's one of those things you're going to try and work on when it comes to being honest with anyone else or just yourself. So anyway, using that color spectrum thing, obviously there's only so much in between those the colors, and you have to live within that spectrum, within the bedrock, within the boundaries, between the rock and the hard place. You got to live in between those boundaries that exist already. So yeah, the same thing with the deepness. I just an idea I thought about where it's deepest most when there's empty space. You can see the furthest. Obviously, all we are is living in is a bunch of empty space. We're made up of empty space. Um, so all we're doing is moving around. It's mostly nothing with some granulars in between, sort of floating and being, having they're spread apart and sort of like particles in the air. Our body is spread apart to a certain degree on a much smaller scale. Um, like sort of like little pieces of sand repelling against each other but staying in a foundation. That's what our body is made up of. Hands, feet, everything, every single body of something that can be torn down, ripped apart, and can completely change the foundation of a certain area, place. Anything can be torn down or replaced. Um, anything can be, um, yeah, anything can be changed. Everything in this reality is malleable, except empty space to a certain degree, obviously not um, explicitly. And let me explain, I suppose. You can tear down walls and stuff, but the things that make up the foundation of, say, air, gravity, those things, those forces that exist outside the basic foundation of the boundaries can only be destroyed, I suppose, by the boundaries. Sort of like if you destroyed a planet, you destroyed that planet's gravity, or the thin air, the space is really the only thing, I suppose I'm saying, that cannot be torn down or eliminated, is just empty space, deep space, and outer space. So that's really the only thing that can be torn apart, and that's the deepest thing is space. You can see the farthest when there's nothing in the way. And you can see just as well when something's close up, but you can see the farthest when there's nothing in the way, if that means anything. So yeah, just surrounded by boundaries. Boundaries can be completely destroyed, and the only thing that's the foundation of everything is just empty space, including ourselves. Everything can be destroyed. Take those granulars that I was talking about, that I was mentioning, and just replace that with thin air, and all of a sudden I'm nothing. I'm deatomized, being torn apart atom by atom until I'm nothing, just but empty space myself. And that's what I end up being. So that's really all there is empty space and little boundaries created by repelling little granulars, which we call photons or whatever it may be. Yes, photons and atoms, made up of photons and so on and so forth. I mean, yes, we were made up of small little granulars repelling against each other, keeping in a foundation, being forced into a foundation based on elements and atoms and molecules forcing themselves together in like little little boxes, and we're being forced into those little foundations of boundaries, and those boundaries can be easily destroyed. So everything you see can be completely destroyed. Any idea of a beautiful imagery can be completely annihilated because it's just a bunch of empty space. It's just something right there to create a fence or a boundary or a maze for you to walk through, like trees in a forest. Deforest all those trees, and all of a sudden there's nothing but thin air in those where the trees were. It's just empty space now. So it's nothing all that special. So it's just just thin air, pretty much, is all there is. And everything, regardless of the granulars I was talking about, is just something that can be completely torn apart. Disregarding the granulars, or the things that we're made up of on the smallest scale. So there's something that we're always, that can, everything here is pretty much destroyable, malleable, and that's all we have, is something that can be destroyed, something that be harmed. The walls in this room can be destroyed, and I can be destroyed, but the thing is that doesn't matter. It's about my welfare. It doesn't matter if this is a psychological state, or this is that, or that is this, that is destroyed. It's a matter of what's in here and what I'm feeling that matters, and if I don't recognize that, that doesn't have to be an issue. Wow, anyway. Weird on non sequiturs. and dealing with a lot of non sequiturs in this video. But yeah, that's really all there is to this existence, is bunch of tear downable, malleable stuff that can be completely annihilated, and all there is a bunch of empty space, a bunch of darkness. And that's the default setting for reality, is darkness. The only thing that brings us light is our light sources, our photons moving through space at the speed of light. Anyway, so yes, with an ending statement, everything around you, just imagine it's the deepest when you can see just empty space. You look at the stars, I'm looking pretty deep. I'm looking farther, deeper inside me, but also outwardly, goes inside, goes into my brain, and I see outwardly. That's very interesting, obviously. Not really. So you're seeing the deepest when there's no boundaries in your way, there's not a wall in your way. So it's just one of those things, you know. So yeah, you see the deepest when there's nothing in the way. Anyway, so moving on. Yeah, I was mentioned something about facing forever. Yeah, facing death, realizing being stuck in this situational game, not letting the fact that you recognize this game is faulty and there's nothing worth playing, but also recognizing, I hope this game doesn't happen again. Psychological responses, yes, but also realizing the philosophy surrounding the world and how that can be obviously part of the issue, I suppose. But yes, it is an issue. Obviously dealing with the acknowledgement that maybe something will happen again, such as a collapsing Earth or planet, or no, universe, excuse me. Yeah, so we just repeat the same process over and over again, but there's only one psychological response in regards to that, and that's just, oh well, the game's going to force me into this situation regardless, but let's just hope not. It's to a certain degree, it's an unknown answering question. We can only answer it so far, and I don't know quite yet, at least. I mean, there's not really much to talk about. I mean, I've mentioned this before. There's not much to mention, especially when you're not in a video making mood. So yeah, I suppose I've really mentioned everything. I guess I'll just go over each part one more time. So the good, bad, and the bad, good, the bad. Regardless, you know, there's good and then there's bad, but what we consider good is just a lack of bad. There's less bad, at least a good in a relative state compared to the bad that you were experiencing before. So the bad you were experiencing before makes it seem like you're in a good state now. Maybe sometimes you can consider the best state that you've been in, but it's still on the spectrum of a bad state from 0 to negative. And that's the game that we're working on, is a 0 to negative, and there's nothing else that we're doing, is working on that scale. But that scale, regardless of that scale, it's all bad, and there's only escaping the bad momentarily, only to leave more space open for the bad when you're in the good, and when you're in the bad, you're in over your knees. You're waist deep into the life game, into the maze, being caught up, recognizing. But yeah, you're either experiencing a bad state, you're just varying levels of a bad state. That's all there is to this existence, regardless of whatever experience you may be having, or sensation, positive, negative, positive, negative. So regardless of that, you're not having something, it's still bad. You don't have something you want, it's still bad. And something's bad happening to you, it's still bad. It's bad, it's bad. And when you're feeling good, it's still bad. It's just less bad than the bad you're experiencing from those other two situations. You feel good once you found your pencil and once your stub toe is gone. your stub toe is no longer stubbed. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, yeah, I feel a little better now. Only you're still bad, and it's only leaving more room for bad to happen again. More addiction, more desire, more um, tension to build up inside of you. So that's that. Um, yeah, the color spectrum, we can only do so much to change reality. Or we can only move within the boundaries of the color spectrum, knowing full well that there's boundaries to our existence and understanding. Not only understanding, but the foundation of how we move around this world. We can change things, but we can only change things within reality, within the tools that we have, that we're given, that not only given, but also the only tools that we're ever going to have, because they're the only tools that exist. And deepness, obviously empty space. All we are is just a bunch of empty space and molecules ourselves, and those molecules obviously can be broken down into energy, because all we are is just energy. If you break us down to the smallest level, we can be reduced to just a bunch of aura, just an aura, like a fart in the wind. It's just an aura, just something that flows. It's just like a little light source traveling. It's just an aura, something creating a pathway, or forced into a pathway based on directional velocity, or whatever it may be. Forced into a situation. Obviously, we're forced ourselves as well. Dragged or pulled or pushed in. Pushed in, being forced into a situation. That's what we're doing. We're being forced into situations. Light's being forced in a direction. Non sequitur again. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to make videos. It's kind of boring and dull. But yeah, pushing forward, we're being pushed. And there's only, everything we have is just molecules in thin air. Just doing, moving, being forced into boundaries, changing around, and doing not much else. Except the same old thing that they always do. Jesus, I'm sorry, this is such a boring video. I don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, but yeah, it's just a bunch of space. You can break it down, and in reality, the deepest you can look is an empty space, but everything be broken down in just a bunch of empty space. Obviously, it can't be reduced. It's not irreducibly complex. It can be only reduced so much. It can't be neither created nor destroyed. But still, I guess the point I want to make is everything at its foundation is empty space. It's just an aura, something gathered around, like separated, repelling grains of sand. You see it, it's a giant sand creature, and it's just a bunch of little empty spaces with a bunch of sand. You look at it from far away, it looks like it's a hole, but then you look up close and you see there's an inch between each grain of sand. Or there's a space in between each grain of sand. There's a small space, or like the atoms and the photons that make up the atoms in the smallest possible level. Electrons, neutrons, protons. Forcing the atom, and so on and so forth. But everything can be destroyed. Everything can be changed into something else. Just staring off into the light, staring off into the space, realizing just how deep you can go when there's just nothing there in the way. So anyway, yeah, I'm facing forever. Realizing that you're stuck in a game regardless, and you're stuck into a game, realizing that the light was your living, and the darkness is your non-living state, your death, and you're forced into this, and this is the unnatural state. The living state is the strange, awkward middle step child, is the awkward, non-weird anomaly that happened, and it's the light and the darkness. And facing that darkness and realizing that darkness may last, only for maybe something to happen again in its place, who knows? Facing forever seems like something, either facing the forever of a non-ending cycle, knowing or not knowing, or facing forever. I mean, really, it doesn't really matter. If I am existing now and something existed before me, I wouldn't have known because I have no context. Anyway, yes, so there's only so much we can do about that. Like I said, we can only work within the boundaries of our existence. So that's what we're forced into, is to just deal with it. We can change the things, like I mentioned, to a certain degree, but we can't change the fact that reality is the way reality is, the way it functions. We cannot change anything on its fundamental level. We cannot change we cannot change the bedrock of reality. So, I think that's all there is to mention. Yep, I think that's it. Sorry for the long video, guys. If anyone's gonna even watch it. Not getting many views lately, but oh well. We'll see what happens. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Feeling a little awkward right now. It's kind of that way when you don't want to make videos and you kind of stumble your way through one, but hey, it happens from time to time. I don't need to rationalize myself anymore. Anyway, I'll see you guys in another video. Maybe soon, sometime. Later on. So, thank you, and until next time. Sorry if the video was, kind of confusing, but it's fine.